Double check that, yes, we have started recording. So I'll just give a little bit of a reminder if we have other people joining us. But thank you very much for everyone who's turned their video off and muted themselves. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Volunteering in Nature Summer Series. My name is Melanie Treweek and I am the State Education and Interpretation Coordinator at Parks Victoria, and I'm going to be facilitating this presentation today. In the digital world, we come together from many places. I acknowledge that today we may be gathering on Aboriginal lands, many Aboriginal lands, and I pay my respect to all traditional owners on the lands on which we're gathering. For me, I'm presenting from the beautiful coastal lands of the Boonwurrung peoples, and I pay my respect and recognise the sovereignty of their elders, past, present and emerging. Parks Victoria is very excited to be running the Volunteering in Nature Summer Series this week. We hope that you've enjoyed the range of online and park activities so far. It's been a great way to recognise our volunteers and to celebrate International Volunteer Day tomorrow, especially with the return of volunteering in our parks after a very challenging year. The longer days now will allow us to reconnect. So we hope that you've registered for a range of events and training opportunities that we've had on offer. If not, you can head to Park Connect and find out a little bit more and get yourself registered. So today's presenter is James Frazer. James is a Water Watch Coordinator at Melbourne Water. In his role, he manages the Melbourne Water Frog Census. So this is a long-standing citizen science program tracking the health of Melbourne's frog populations. James will provide us with an introduction to the amazing world of frogs. He'll cover the ecological role of frogs in wetlands and waterways, the threats that are facing our frogs, and some practical hands-on citizen science and habitat restoration actions that you can help to take to help our frog populations. So let's cross over to James and say a quick hello.
Hello, thanks for having me, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you, James. And being a bit of a frogger myself, I'm really excited about your presentation today. Just before we launch into the presentation, there is a little bit of digital housekeeping to go over. So as I've mentioned, if you're just joining us now or joining us a little bit late, we do ask you to mute yourself and to also turn off your video just so that we have the best bandwidth and audio clarity. If you do have some questions through the presentation, you can type them into the comment section. We'll have some time at the end for James to answer those and have a bit of a further chat about what interests you. And if you have any IT issues, we do have a bit of a troubleshooting team on hand. So you can call or text our IT support person. Their details are also provided in the comment section. So you'll find a mobile number there that you can text if you have issues throughout the presentation. As we mentioned, we are recording this for future training sessions, so it will be uploaded to our website after this presentation. So thank you again for joining us, and I'll hand over to James for his presentation.
Okay, thanks Mel. I'll just bring up my slides. Now, just please let me know when you can see my screen. Okay, is it all up, Mel?
Yes, looking great.
Excellent. And audio coming through all clear? Just do that check before I get going.
Yes, you sound great too, James.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, yeah, look, thanks so much to Parks Victoria for the invite. Yeah, my name's James Frazer from Melbourne Water. We're Melbourne's managers of major drainage and waterway networks, sewerage and water supply infrastructure. And you're probably going to be wondering, well, why are we interested in frogs? Well, I'll certainly get into that. And I'll say hello as well from the traditional lands of the Kulin Nations as well. I may drop my camera off at some point as well while I'm talking. So, frogs, that's what I'm here to talk about today. And as Mel touched on, my program is Melbourne Water Frog Census. Now it's a long-standing, it turns 20 years old next year, long-standing citizen science program and it works with the community to monitor frogs throughout the greater Melbourne region. Now, what we mean by that is that we have volunteers. We have about 3,700 volunteers that get out and collect acoustic recordings of frog calls. Now, every frog has a different call. Well, almost every frog has a quite distinguishably different call. So we can identify species that way. And so the data collected by volunteers, that's submitted to us at Melbourne Water. We have experts verify it, and then we're able to understand over time, the distribution of frog species, and then start understanding how they're doing in the Melbourne region, and indeed, what could be done to improve the condition of frog populations too. Now, my brief here at this talk is, we're covering all of the state, right? And I'm just from the Greater Melbourne region, so it's really important to stress that each region in Victoria, largely broken down into natural resource management regions, you're going to have, a local frog program that's likely to be active in your area. So don't feel like if I'm talking about the Melbourne program that this is in any way excluding anyone from the state, right? There's some fantastic programs out there. Now, what I do generally is I'd encourage you to sort of contact your local, catchment management authority, contact your local, Parks Vic ranger, and you'll find out what is available out there for you. And there's a whole range of monitoring tools out there. For us at Melbourne Water Frog Census, we actually have a mobile phone app, right, that we use. But equally, there's ones in other regions of Victoria, and there's the big national one as well, Frog ID. So, froggers are really spoiled at the moment, right? We've got so much digital technology to use to record frog calls. Now, let's get into it. So, what I'm really going to talk about today is I'm just going to give you a quick flying overview of frogs. What on earth are they? I'm going to take a bit of assumed knowledge here that most people know what frogs are and are familiar with the life cycle. And then, I'm going to talk about their role in the environment and really what the health of frog populations can tell us a bit about the health of the environment. And if you're a Parks Vic volunteer, that could be quite useful maybe for you in managing any of your sites. And then I'll introduce you to maybe a few common species found throughout Victoria that are reasonably indicative of the life strategies of a number of frogs. And then we'll talk about how you can help save frogs too, because there's some pretty good reasons to want to save them. Yeah, I might just drop this camera off here. I'll just turn my camera off. Cool. Okay. Right, so frogs, what are they? Well, frogs have a very long evolutionary lineage, right? We're talking hundreds of millions of years. These are amazing survivors, and over that time have diversified into literally thousands of different species globally. They can be found in a whole range of habitats, right? Like most of us would associate them with wetlands and swamps and that kind of thing, maybe even, rainforests. But the reality is, they can be found in really dry areas too. They are water dependent creatures, but, that means they just need to be able to secure moisture within the landscape through a couple of their life stages and to maintain themselves as adults. So frogs, remarkably adaptive creatures. They've had a long time to do it too, right? Now, frogs we probably all know, are amphibians. If you speak ancient Greek around the place, then you'd know that's amphibios, two lives. I'm sure we're all familiar with the life cycle. Basically, half of their, a part of their life, I should say, is spent as in an aquatic larval life stage as a tadpole, and during that time they're a herbivore or an omnivore, grazing on algae and detritus and so on. And And really, there's a kind of important role being played straight away in a waterway or wetland ecosystem in that they're sort of breaking down, some of those nutrients at that primary level of production, and then they're beginning to transfer energy up the food chain. So larval life stage, gills a bit like a fish on the tadpole, and grazing on algae and so on. Now, gradually through the amazing process of metamorphosis, they transition to an air-breathing life on land as a four-legged terrestrial predator. Quite an amazing transformation that goes on there. So I guess all those nutrients that were initially captured from detritus and algae are suddenly being transferred onto land as a frog that then begins to predate insect populations. Now, on the other hand, tadpoles, frogs, even their spawn eggs are the source of food for a range of wetland creatures too. So, in a way, they are helping support populations of other wetland creatures like birds, water bugs, even snakes as well. And frogs can often, exist at very high densities in a given site, dependent on species, of course. But often hundreds of eggs are laid. Hundreds of tadpoles hatch. Not all of them can survive, sadly. So many are predated at that stage, and then even as mature frogs, they're eaten. So you've got these two lives that are effectively linking aquatic and terrestrial habitats together and food chains together. And then in addition, you have these predators that are regulating the population of invertebrates and even, algal blooms and things like that. Now, general body plan of frogs, got a little picture of a jumping, growling grass frog there. Anyone who's a kind of fanatic, gym junkie would notice those extremely ripped legs that it has. I guess if you're doing a lot of squats and huge jumps every day, you would have pretty muscly back legs too. Frog's basic body plan, 4 legs. For many species, extremely powerful back legs and a skeletal structure really built for a fair bit of power, both in jumps and landing. So, fused forearm bones, very short, strong vertebrae, not particularly flexible or movable neck, very wide head, or wide mouth as well, and fascinating skin covering these things. It can vary from being quite slimy through to sort of dryish and covered in a range of kind of raised tubercles, which are sort of toughened, keratinized, like warts in a way on the skin. Really depends on the species. Now, the frogs, as an adult, as I said, are a predator. They have excellent eyesight. Hearing, of course, also being needed for many species for hearing the calls of the males as well, but also, of course, hearing the movements of predators and their prey. They tend to hunt only moving prey, with maybe a few exceptions that will eat things not moving. I think one of the famous examples is cane toads eating bowls of cat food and things, but generally they need moving prey. When they eat the prey, effectively, what they eat, the type of prey they eat, is for many species whatever can kind of fit inside their mouth. And that can include often smaller individuals of their own kind as well. So they're cold and brutal creatures, and eating, they just swallow their prey whole. They don't chew it up in their mouth or anything like that. It's really just crammed down the throat. Hideous way to go. Hands can assist to shove that food down the throat. And eyeballs can be used to help swallow, or are used to help swallow too. So the throat muscles aren't particularly strong, so the eyeballs actually retract into the mouth cavity and shove that food down. little known fact for frogs. Now, frogs sort of keep growing throughout their whole lives, and over that time they also shed their skins too. So they kind of slow off their skin, scraping it away with their hands, and then shove it in their mouth and eat it as well. Kind of disgusting. I'm going to just take it as a given. Most of you attending don't eat your own skin. Pretty foul. Foul to watch as well. But you know, that's frogs for you. Well, let's move on. So that really just a flying overview of what these things are, and I probably should say as well that you know, these are so to say, you know, cold-blooded creatures, so they really rely on environmental sources of warmth. So their activity kind of correlates to how warm it is, to their metabolism and so on. All right, just go to the next slide. Oh, sorry. Mel, are you seeing a slide transition?
No, we're not, James.
Okay, just give me a moment. It's just locked up. Yeah. So. Okay, how's that?
Yep, all good.
Excellent. Yep, nothing like a bit of an IT thing on Fridays. So frogs as environmental indicators. Look, frogs, you know, play a really important role in the environment, as I've just sort of touched on. But probably a thing to stress is that frogs, you know, they don't drink water. Like, they don't go down to the water's edge and kind of drink through their mouths. They largely absorb water through their skin. Skin is highly porous to, you know, it exchanges gases and liquid very readily. So they're not only water dependent to avoid dehydration, right? But they're also, you know, if you can breathe and drink through your skin, you're also highly sensitive to anything that might be in the water, you know, so like pollution and that kind of thing. Now, frogs also have quite complex reproductive needs. You know, most species, not all, lay their eggs in water as well. So all these things kind of combined, well, we can use frogs as an environmental indicator, because if they're sensitive to pollution, they're sensitive to, you know, maybe drought, the impacts of climate change. They're sensitive to, you know, changes in wetland chains and things like that. Then how a frog population is doing might tell us a little bit about the wider health of a waterway and wetland environment as well. So monitoring frogs at your site, you know, your local volunteering sites, might give you other lines of data that can tell you, you know, maybe what the health of the waterway system is in that area. And also, there's a terrible fungus or a terrible, you know, pandemic. We got our human one at the moment, right? Frogs, they've had one running now for quite some time called chytrid fungus, and that's having terrible impacts on many frog populations globally. So how frogs are doing might also tell us something about the relative impact of that fungus in an area when long-term data sets are examined. So yeah, frogs, great environmental indicators. Really encourage you to adopt them as one line of inquiry for your sites. And of course, you know, the best way to do it, if you want to get a snapshot of environmental health at your site, would be to line it up with a few other indicators as well. You know, condition of waterway vegetation, for example. Now, bit about the breeding of frogs. Really, probably the key point to say here is that frog breeding is highly, or, you know, reproductive strategies are highly variable. So what I've got up here on the screen is, it's a southern brown tree frog, right? And there's a few stages of its egg development there. So basically, with frogs in terms of breeding, the most commonly known and you know, probably the majority strategy for most species is to directly lay the eggs in a pool of water, you know, a pond. Now, only the male frogs call, and they're calling really to attract females and also convey some information about the, you know, their relative fitness to rival males. And females obviously attracted over. The females are typically, for many species, larger than the males, and maybe that's they need a bit more energy and space for eggs. The eggs are laid, no shell, in a jelly capsule, and they can be in a range of types, anything from singly laid right through to foam egg masses with hundreds. And fertilization external, and the embryo develops within that egg, and the tadpoles will sort of grow within the jelly sac to a certain stage depending on species before hatching. So there on the right hand side is an image of some at an early stage of development. Probably still, maybe they've got external gills or something there still, and they'll hatch out eventually. So I'm sure you'll sort of know this stuff, right? And then out come the tadpoles, and the tadpoles will develop over any given number of weeks or months based on the species, some being as quick as sort of 7 weeks from tadpole to frog. Others could take a year as well and turn into a big fish looking thing. Now the tadpoles are going to need a good source of algal films to graze on, and they're going to need some sun to bask in as well, which the warmer water temperature speeds up their development, and they get some vitamin D to grow the bones. And down the bottom right-hand corner is a little metamorph. So it's still got its tail, and it is a bit of a no-no handling frogs without gloves on. This was found by someone that was doing a completely unrelated activity, not frogging at all. So it's just a good opportunity to grab a shot of a metamorph just to show how small and vulnerable they are. They still need really damp, lots of damp microsites at that stage. They're literally just emerging from the water. They can't dry out at all. Very vulnerable. Now the tail is gradually reabsorbed into the body as well, so that's the energy goes back in. And then after that, they begin predating invertebrates. Yeah, what do they need? Where do they live? What do these things need? There's really two types of habitats we need to think of: aquatic habitats and terrestrial. So the aquatic habitat is your classic frog pond. Right, now that can really vary depending on species. What we're talking about when we say frog pond, it could range from a massive wetland that's heavily vegetated with all these different vegetation layers you can see in this picture, right through to simply a flooded bit of grass, that just gets a bit of rain through autumn into spring. For some species, they'll actually lay their eggs on land and then wait for seasonal inundation. And this diagram should give you an idea that there's a variety of egg-laying sites, and I'll get onto that when I talk about species. Okay, and terrestrial habitats. Well, as I said, frogs can live in a range of habitats, anything from very, very wet, tropical rainforest to wetlands to dry forest. And here I have a photo of a billabong. They've got a waterway and adjacent wetland, and then I have some pictures from dry forest and a dry swamp gum woodland with these kind of sparse-looking areas of dead leaves and stuff. But they're seasonally flooded drainage lines, which a rare frog breeds in there, and it just relies on those autumn through spring rains to fill that area up. But otherwise, site. So frogs will pop up in the strangest places, and indeed in human places too. There's a number of species that have taken advantage of the habitats we provide. On the left is a stormwater pond. So this is part of a stormwater filtration system draining into the Maribyrnong River that has growling grass frog present in that pond. And on the right is a decommissioned open sewer from back in the day, a Werribee open sewer, and it's been colonised by sedges. And indeed a few, both weedy and native herbs and things like that. And, common froglets have actually moved in and, call in there. So they will turn up in some odd places. Some of them are highly robust. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about identifying frogs and how to work out what's in your area. And I guess straight off the mark, I'd say each local area of Victoria or each region tends to have, some local authorities, your frog gurus there. And also often the catchment management authorities have produced little, handbooks to your local species too. So I really encourage you to search that stuff out. Now, when you identify a frog, if you're lucky enough to see one, there's probably a few basic things that can give you an idea of what they might be, right? So the first is you need some resource though to identify them. That could be the Frog Census app that has a field guide. It could be one of the other apps. It could be a handbook. Now, there's going to be certain physical features of the frog that may give it away about what it is. Some frogs are stout, squat and muscular creatures. Others have a longer body plan and longer, stronger limbs, for example. Maybe that's the difference between marsh frogs and tree frogs there. Coloration can sometimes be quite a useful diagnostic feature, particularly where it's things like bright flash patches on the thighs and groin. They may be diagnostic. General kind of body coloration, you've got to be careful with some species. It can be quite variable, but nonetheless, often, a good start. Now, there may be other physical features with them. It could be things like the arrangement of the pupils. Do they have horizontal pupils? Do they have vertical arranged pupils? Do they have a cross-shaped pupil like this Perrin's tree frog, bottom left? The arrangement of the eyes on the head might be another giveaway. Some are sort of right up the top, more like periscopes to poke out the water, others around the side. There may also be things like glands, raised glands that are diagnostic. So if you look to the top left image, you can see this kind of orangey coloured raised linear gland on this pobblebonk here. They can be diagnostic of the marsh frog group. And if you were to look at a pobblebonk's leg on its tibia, you'd see a raised oval gland as well. So they're often quite good giveaways, and glands can be arranged all over the body too. Now, the arrangement of the hands and feet, so the toes and the extent of webbing is another good giveaway. Some frogs have, fully webbed back toes, others webbing absent. Some may have round adhesive toe pads, others may have no toe pads, just pointy toes. Some will have, really long, like certain toes will be very long. And then there may be the presence of other things like tubercles, those keratinized, raised areas on the foot, even what's called metatarsal tubercles that are sort of like keratinized projections that can assist in digging on the back legs. There may be spines, kind of funnily called nuptial pads, which enable males to grip females that may occur on the inside of the hands. All these things are great diagnostic features. And finally, the two other things: the call, without a doubt, the call of the frog, really important for diagnosing what it is. And then distribution maps. I always jump on one of these public platforms like Atlas of Living Australia, because then you'll find out what species are found where, and you won't get a corroboree frog in docklands, for example, or something like that. Now, I'll just show you three sort of groups of frogs that are pretty representative of what you find across Victoria, and you in your own region will often have related species to these. I can't, sadly talk in detail about, your individual areas, or, hold myself out to be an expert in the frogs of the Mallee, for example, but I can introduce you to all these ones, which will give you a bit of a clue of the different types of behaviour, and then you'll be able to expand out your search to these different types of species in your area. Now, first one, common froglet. This one, as its name suggests, is very common, very widespread across all of southern and eastern Australia. really robust frog, very small, like 2.5 centimeters in size. And this thing can really breed year round, right? It will just take advantage of, areas of flooded grass or permanent bodies of water. It's really quite adaptable. If you were to flip it over, you'd find this black and white mottling on the undersurface, and also very long toe on the back leg as well. I've circled there. Sometimes they have these kind of triangular mottling or triangular patterns on the upper lip as well that you might be able to see on one of the images. And the patterns and colorations really variable on this species, even within one clutch. So you got to be really careful trying to identify just using patterns for these ones. Now I'll just quickly play you its call. I think I can whack a few frog calls on today. Yeah, this one's pretty distinctive, kind of crickets type call. Okay, and some of you are going to have an eastern sign-bearing froglet relative of this one that have a bit more of a squelchy call. But yeah, calls year round, lays its eggs are pretty large, often singular or in small groups on the substrate. And tadpoles develop very quickly, just 7 weeks it can be when conditions are good, nice and warm, from tadpole to frog. And here's just an example of its habitat and its distribution. So I can just take those flooded kind of swales and things. And probably should be noted, this thing is actually pretty resistant to the chytrid fungus, which is a bit of a worry because it can function as effectively a reservoir host. It can sustain the chytrid fungus in its population and pass it on to more vulnerable frogs. So has a bit of, academics can have a bit of a mixed opinion on that one. Now, the marsh frog group. The marsh frogs, they comprise a whole sort of suite of frogs. The common froglets are ground frog. The marsh frogs sort of previously lumped in with them, but I think now kind of been plucked out into Limnodonestidae group, means I think Lord of the Marsh. And really these frogs, say the 3 representative ones I've got here, spotted, striped, and banjo frog, or pobblebonk as many prefer to call it. They have a few other kind of ones like this barking marsh frog that's a little bit similar to spotted, for example, that's found in the north of the state. Now, all of these are really defined by just a few things, right? First, the call is a kind of a variant of a tuk type call, and they all lay their eggs in a foam egg mass on the surface of the water, normally tucked in amongst aquatic vegetation or even concealed. And the female will lay hundreds of eggs, right? And then she will drive, she often has flanges on her hands, and she'll drive bubbles under her body, bubbles of air, and whip up that egg mass into a foam. So that's a real sort of diagnostic feature of this species, foam egg mass laid. All of them also have a long linear gland that runs from kind of below the eye or corner of the mouth down to the shoulder as well, that you may be able to make out on this picture. And the pobblebonk has its additional gland on the back leg, on the tibia, that's a little bit sort of hard to make out on that picture, but I'll show you a close up in a minute. Now the calls I'll just play to you as well, and I'll play them in series from the smallest spotted marsh upwards. So spotted marsh, couple of river pebbles being hit together, maybe. Okay, and then the striped marsh, a bit more like a tennis ball or a chook or a bit of wood, 2 bits of wood being hit together. Striped marsh frog, real kind of deadly predator. These things can grow pretty big. Males I think engage in a bit of combat. You know, they can grow these massive like gym junkie forearms and wrestle each other, and they'll eat anything. You know, they'll eat their own kind even that goes past them. And the pobblebonk frog, the beloved pobblebonk or banjo frog, has a bit of a resonant bonk bonk call. I just love pobblebonks and that call. Now the spotted marsh and the striped can breed year round. Pobblebonk can too, but really its sort of peak breeding is in spring when you get those really good rains and warm conditions, and they often merge into mass breeding events. And here's an image on the left, masses of pobblebonk eggs. Almost looks like someone's gone nuts with the detergent, but it's not. And there's the tibial gland on the pobblebonk there. It's toxic, so don't snack on them. Yeah, of course, you'd also be in trouble with the law if you do, and unethical. Now the tree frog group. Now, really, for the purposes of not having too much time, really the diagnostic element for the tree frog group is really adhesive toe pads. Those round kind of suction cup like toe pads on, that allow these species to climb, and they have a few other things, like I think a few extra bones in the fingers and things like that. But really, adhesive toe pads, pretty good diagnostic feature of tree frogs, along with a more elongated body. And the tadpoles, they tend to hover head up in the water as well, often just using the tips of their tails. It's often quite diagnostic when you're looking at a pond. And here's three examples, right? The southern brown tree frog, whistling, and the Perrin's tree frog. Now, all of these can really, or at least the southern brown and whistling will breed from late winter, and down here in the south of the state, southern brown tree frog, really kicking off in July in particular. Especially when you sort of get to those silver wattles flowering, it's really singing, and then it'll kind of quieten down around this time of the year, and maybe just sort of arc up when there's a bit more rain. Same with the whistling. The Perrin's tree frog, tends to call a little bit later. Now, the first two, yep, they're called tree frogs, but you won't find southern brown and whistling hanging out in trees. They're really, just spending their time on the ground, often calling from vegetation adjacent to ponds. The Perrin's tree frog, true climber, will climb into red gums. It's sort of reasonably well associated with things like red gum country, and it'll call from those elevated patches before moving down. Telling them apart, well, southern brown and whistling pretty similar, right? Maybe one diagnostic feature with the whistling is that the southern brown, if you would extend its back leg, it has kind of yellow to orange pigmentation on the thigh and the groin. Now the whistling does too, but it also has this kind of blotched, black spots in there too, and slightly smaller toe pads as well. So reasonably kind of, it's hard to notice, but the calls are slightly different. And the Perrin's tree frog, great diagnostics, like huge toe pads, often emerald flecks on its back, very bright pigmentation on the thighs and arms, and cross-shaped pupils, great way to distinguish. And all these species lay their eggs in a fluid jelly mass. Now I'll just play you the calls of them too, because they've got some great calls. So southern brown first. And whistling, see if you notice the difference. It's reasonably similar, but Perrin's sounds a fair bit different. The maniacal cackling frog, crazy laugh. Don't build a frog pond next to your bedroom window if you don't like this call. Okay. And yeah, as I said, tadpoles kind of tend to hover head up in the water column, and the female lays her eggs attached to submerged either vertical or horizontal stems in a a jelly sac with dozens of eggs inside it, and the tadpoles can take around about 3 months to develop under good conditions too. And they're often these are the ones that move into your frog pond when you build it. These and particularly things like the spotted marsh frog. And finally, for talking tree frogs, I should mention the frog that seems to really dislike hanging around trees, which is the growling grass frog. Endangered species in Victoria, EPBC Act listed. Amazing, beautiful frog that sadly declined badly due to chytrid fungus and habitat loss. Now, this species is really a sort of late spring, summer caller. Its tadpoles can take many months to develop and grow to huge sizes, several centimeters long. It's generally like a bright green to kind of bronzy color with distinct blue pigmentation on the thighs that you'd be able to see, and a very warty back. And there's also green and golden bell frog that has a smooth back that's a little bit similar. Its call, you might say, why is it called growling grass frog? Well, kind of sounds like if you get the dirt bikers riding around your property boundary at night time. So it's got that call, right? Now, just conscious of time, better keep moving. Threats to frogs. Well, look, I've just plucked out 3 that are really sort of key threats, but threats are going to really depend on local context. There could be a range of other really locally specific impacts there, but really the big 3, right, are chytrid fungus, this terrible pandemic that swept amphibian populations. Several Australian species believed to have gone extinct. Really thrives in cool, wet environments and attacks the keratin on the frog's skin, and I think is effectively leads to a massive nervous system shutdown. So it's a terrible disease, and each species varies in its ability to tolerate it too, and its persistence in the environment is determined by things like reservoir hosts. So I'll tell you a bit about how you can avoid that, spreading that, but it's just important to know that's really smashed some frog populations badly. Habitat loss and degradation, like most threatened species, like many species, that is right up there at the top. That a lot of these other threats, are sort of stresses, right, from that just feed into the fact that like huge amounts of frog wetlands have just been bulldozed for other uses, agriculture and housing and industrial development, and then all the associated stormwater runoff with pollutants has degraded other remnant habitats. So really important to understand that one. Every time they lose habitat, the population loses the capacity to breed and produce increasing numbers of individuals. And Gambusia fish, an introduced pest fish or mosquito fish as it's known, these things I think they give birth to live young, which can actually, tiny larval stage can be transported possibly by even wetland birds to other wetlands. These things turn up, they get into plague proportions, and they just eat eggs and nip at tadpoles, and they can really impact frog populations too. Real pain. Yeah, but what can you do? How can you save frogs? Now, Mel, I've realised we're getting near the end here, so is it okay to keep pushing on and then we'll do our questions?
Yeah, certainly.
Yep, cool. Okay, so what I'll do is, I've just touched on those threats. So what can you actually do? And, I'd encourage you to explore threats to frogs more, particularly in your local context. There's a range of things that could be impacting them, but there's a range of great stuff that you can do to help them. Now, number one, right, all good conservation needs good knowledge. So I'd really encourage you just straight up, right, to get out and learn about frogs, access frog resources like the Frog Census app or your other, locally specific apps and programs, frog guidebooks, get a frog talk going in your local area with one of your local experts, go out on a frog night, begin building your knowledge, and then engage in advocacy, right? Because 40% of frogs are actually threatened with extinction in our lifetime. Not many people know that, and a lot of focus goes on to other, classes of fauna. All fauna is worthy of saving, but frogs can always benefit from a bit of a nudge and, you know, a few more vocal voices. And there's numerous ways to do that, from, you know, bringing in newbies into to frog nights and letting them experience that utter magic that is hearing a, you know, a huge frog at a wetland at night. Or you can, you know, spread the word via social media, or you can engage in art programs like this Truganina mural of a growling grass frog. You know, there's so many ways that you can spread the word, but the key is to get people more aware of these creatures and their needs, you know, so that we can act to save them. Now, another one, I talked about habitat loss, is you can construct frog habitat, right? If you're, you know, volunteering in a park, if you've got a, you know, even a community garden, you've got your own backyard, what have you, you can build some habitat. And what I mean by that is both favourable terrestrial habitat that preserves those damp microsites in the environment for frogs to survive and retain moisture, but also breeding ponds, right? So that, you know, you can grow the size of the local population, you can provide more options for that population to grow. Or indeed even a pond, you know, if there's a pollution event, you might have built some offline habitat, you know, further up in the park or in your back garden, and the pollution can't reach it. And so you've got a bit of habitat security for your local frogs. Melbourne Water Frog Census webpage has got a guide, the basics on how to build a frog pond on there, and always happy to take inquiries emailed through to assist you and support you to build that. And, you know, if you're in a different area from the Greater Melbourne region, hit up your local authorities, and you can get some great results. You know, out in Keilor, Penley, Essendon, Grammar, like they built a frog pond and had growling grass frog turn up. There's one in a jar, right? They're supporting the endangered frog, you know, just this school frog pond. It's just fantastic, right? And, you know, in their case, they'd actually identified the frogs prior, colonising their sporting fields. So their frog pond was really a concrete action that they could do to help sustain those that species in that local environment. So it's a really good way of doing things, right? Now, another way that you can help out is really partnering up with you know, government agencies and even not-for-profits as well, and looking at what you can do together. You know, identify the shared problem. So, you know, Parks Vic, it's just got this massive estate of fantastic conservation land, and, you know, they support numerous threatened species and you know, populations of common species. And, you know, you can look to work together. You can, you know, partner up on grants. So if you can identify a problem, you know, your wetlands are drying out, or you know, due to drought or some other hydrological issue, or you have an endangered species and you can see some stresses in the environment, you know, partner up, begin a monitoring program, and as you get some, you know, quantitative data on you know, what's going on, maybe you can get some works going. And here I just got 3 examples that we've, you know, worked with Parks Vic with. Top left, this looks like a few logs, but that's actually protecting some endangered frog habitat in the southeast of Melbourne. It's a southern toadlet, just breeds in seasonally inundated areas. Those logs just prevent, you know, vehicles moving off track and parking on top of these critters. These critters just burrow down into the soil, or dig a little burrow, and they just lay their eggs in there and then actually wait for water to flood it. So to most people, that just looks like a clear bit of space. Great place to, you know, park a car or something, or even ride your mountain bike over if you felt like it. But these logs are just providing that security. Other things like, you know, Melbourne Water's identified a range of billabongs along the Yarra that have had altered hydrological regimes. It's really impacted a range of species, you know, flora, fauna, frogs. So we've partnered up to do environmental watering and monitored frogs pre and post. And really the lesson is, right, if you want frogs, just add water, because at least in these billabongs in the Yarra, it's gone nuts, right? It's an absolute frog party. So I really encourage you, you know, get involved, and then, you know, look for those grant opportunities, right? Work together. And Kitrid, Melbourne Water Frog Census webpage, we've got a frog census handbook that shows you how to you know, set up your own monitoring program for frogs. And there's an important field hygiene section in there
these are the basics, right? You can just jump on that webpage, Frog Census webpage, and you'll find those key ways that you can reduce the potential to be spreading chytrid between sites, right? Can't stress that enough. Good hygiene, easy to do, right? We're all indoctrinated into it now, you know, wearing masks, hand sanitizing and so on. Well, let's start thinking about our little froggy friends too. And of course, citizen science, right? Like, as I said, best conservation has good knowledge. So, you know, get involved in citizen science, you know, even if that's the only thing you do. Just collecting frog records that contribute to a long-term data set gives real, you know, just increases the confidence of any natural resource managers for being able to do an action and you know that there might be a, you know, a measurable improvement in there. If you're in the Melbourne region, use our Frog Census app. You know, we have it expert verified, and then it goes into our like a master data set of frog data, and we draw on that for our healthy waterway strategy planning. So it's literally informing our, you know, our actions, and similarly in your local areas. And we've got a methodology. Yeah, as I said, jump on that web page. I won't, you know, read through this slide. Broadly, there's a good methodology that you can follow on our Frog Census webpage for knowing how to monitor frogs. And, you know, I'd really encourage you, set up a long-term monitoring. You only need to do it a few times a year. You know, it's quite easy. It's a low hassle type of volunteering, and, you know, you might even go for a walk with the dog, you know, and you can use that as an opportunity, you know, once every few months to collect some frog records, you know, just pull out the phone. And say with our app, like, you can only record for a maximum of 5 minutes. So really it's quite a, it's citizen science for busy people, right? And here's a bit of a checklist. You always got to think safety, right? That's the main thing. Think safety. You know, don't go out to wetlands by yourself at night, right? Stating the bleeding obvious, but, you know, it's just important to think about that too. But yeah, we've got all these resources for you online, and so will your local CMAs. So I'm going to say thank you so much for having me and listening to me ramble on about frogs. And there's the less than subtle message there. If frogs go extinct, right, we're going to notice, because these things have got really important roles in wetland ecosystems. They're regulating pests. 40% are threatened with extinction in our lifetime. They need more advocates. So thank you. Okay, Mel, we've got questions.
James, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing loads of froggy facts with us. You've got a lot of comments here about people being interested in just how fascinating and interesting this taxa is. So I too myself, Rowena, think that you know, eating with the help of your eyeballs is just an incredible adaptation. James, we do have a couple of questions as well for you. So and also invite anyone who has and we've got another comment, eating their own skin. Yes, they definitely are a very fascinating group of animals.
Yeah, I didn't even scratch the surface of how crazy these things get, right? Yeah.
I think my new favourite fact though was the marsh frog family name, Lord of the Marsh. I didn't know that one. I really liked that one.
Yeah.
For the participants, if you've got any questions for James, please write them in the chat box and we'll get to them. But James, I was going to kick off with one that I had. I don't know if it's an easy one or a difficult one, but obviously your world and your job is you know, dominated by frogs, and you've done lots and lots of research on frogs. I'm wondering, do you have a favourite frog, and why, or how? How can you choose a favourite frog if you do have a favourite frog?
Yeah, okay. Well, first up, yeah, frogs are cruel masters. They keep me busy. And I guess, you know, particularly this year, frogs have been very busy with this average to good rainfall, which has meant volunteers have been very busy submitting thousands of app reports. My world is dominated by them. In terms of favourite frogs, crikey, I don't want to play favourites, but I'd probably say most affection for pobblebonks. Beautiful calls going out to a wetland where there's hundreds of pobblebonks, on a spawning night, a mass spawning event is magic. So and once I was sleeping in a swag, and true story, I actually woke up and there was a pobblebonk hopping around, on my head in the swag. So I'm sort of bonded to them, I guess.
That's great. The name pobblebonk is also very appealing for children. I think they find them fascinating just from their name. Some other questions we've got that have come in. You were talking a little bit about chytrid fungus, and you might have covered this, but we've got a question about how chytrid fungus is affecting frogs, whether it's worldwide, it's a global issue, or just an Australian issue.
Yep, absolutely. It's a global pandemic, right? So yeah, it's widespread. Particularly bad impacts in montane tropical areas where you have cool, wet conditions, and often those areas have had almost zero habitat destruction, right? And yet these frogs have just blinked out. These rare species that most people never even heard of them, and then they've just kind of disappeared. And it's sort of first picked up in the 80s. Via a suite of disappearing species. A lot of the really great research has been done in Australia on it, but this is, it's like South America, for example, is a real hotspot of extinction events and risk for these. And I encourage everyone to search chytrid fungus out and learn more about it. It's just a shocker.
And is there any progress that you know of somehow relieving frogs of this threat?
Look, it probably depends on the species. Some species there's some research that indicates they may be developing some natural resilience to it in terms of threatened species. Look, other species appear to live in habitats more favourable to minimising the impact of it. And there's been a few sort of discoveries around kind of warmer conditions may buffer the impacts of it. Slightly saline water or elevated levels of salts in the water. And I'm not talking like, estuaries or anything, but like slightly higher salts in the water via the local geology may also buffer against it too. Current sort of research on growling grass frogs and best practice certainly for the construction of wetlands we're doing for them is really around looking at is there a good salinity of the water? Are there plenty of warm basking sites on that site as well? Yeah, so there's habitat manipulation we can do in some cases, but it's like exceptions are rule with frogs. That's the challenge,
Yeah. We had a question here that kind of links in with that. There would be certain frog species that would be more vulnerable than others to chytrid then if it's somewhat involving environmental factors.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Great. You'd also mentioned too, particularly the invasive mosquito fish species. There was another question from Debbie about invasive species in general. Other than the mosquito fish, are there any other invasive plants or animals that are also threatening frogs in Victoria?
Yeah, you could have a range of site-specific things. So there could be invasive plants, whether they're then invasive aquatics in particular, whether they're native or exotic. Even things like the floating fern azolla, where you have a maybe a frog species that's dependent on good mats of floating and submerged, and particularly submerged aquatic vegetation. If you get these vast and thick mats of floating aquatic weeds that shut out all the sunlight to the lower levels of the pond where the submerged aquatics are, then that could certainly deprive them of habitat, take away sites for positioning eggs. So that's, plants definitely could be a problem. Like cats can predate frogs. I don't know what the
the actual impact on any given species would be. But yeah, certainly, get attracted to a tree frog calling in the grass and have a go.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, gambusia are definitely a bad one.
Yeah. Just on that invasive species, Rowena's just actually asked the flip of that too, not just invasive species that may affect our native frogs. She's wondering, are there any invasive frogs in Victoria and how that might affect local populations?
Yeah, wonder if we get that one. Okay, well, first up, we don't have cane toads, right? Despite, I think there may have been some records on Tullamarine on the tarmac, but we don't have cane toads, all right? So we can thank our lucky stars for that one. But we do have a suite of banana box, or what we call banana box frogs, that get introduced into Victoria. They're subtropical or kind of eastern seaboard species that are transported down in horticultural products, in produce, like bananas and mangoes, and maybe bunches of kale growing up north and so on. And at least one of those species, so we get a few of them get transported down, but Latoria phalanx, the eastern dwarf tree frog, has established self-sustaining populations in Victoria, and particularly in the Melbourne region now. So yeah, we certainly have them. What are the impacts of Latoria phalanx, which is only a couple of centimeters long? Quite a cute little frog, got a zip call. We don't know what the impacts are, right? Yeah, it's certainly not big enough to fight off our local tree frogs, but yeah, who knows what pathogens it might be transporting down.
And is the frog census picking that up? Are you seeing it at those levels?
Yep, it certainly is. Yeah. It's both a mixture of having a lot more monitors on the ground, but yeah, we've got like dozens of records of this Latoria phalanx now, particularly from the Yarra billabongs. So yeah, function of more monitoring, but it's also probably a function of a warming climate and shifting rainfall patterns. If you're a subtropical species, like the weather this year, the subtropical plants in my garden are going gangbusters, right? Like these conditions might be shifting to favour this thing. So maybe we have a bit of a climate migrant on our hands, even if we've dispersed it. Yeah, so we're getting quite a few of them, and just as there's more introduction events, obviously the viability of a population increases too.
The unknown's a little bit scary, isn't it? Like the impact that they may have that we're yet to find out about. Sue also has a great question here. She's wondering, is there a problem, or what are the problems of residential use of garden pesticides, for etc., getting into stormwater and affecting frogs in local wetlands or nearby wetlands?
Yeah, definitely. Do whatever you can to avoid the use of pesticides in your garden. Particularly like spraying to runoff kind of point. These things are very likely having some level of, maybe sub-lethal kind of impact. So it's not like it's, maybe pesticide residues, herbicide residues are flowing into stormwater where it's, people aren't using it responsibly. They're not going to kill off the whole population necessarily. But they may be suppressing, say, the productivity of breeding or something like that, or the immune systems of frogs, which open them to other stress. So I guess the take home is, whenever you that there's, any chance of runoff from your site, you want to really be minimising that use of any pesticides, avoiding them altogether if you can, if you're just a residential block, and really, making sure you sort of got best practice stormwater management, manage your own stormwater on site, and then hopefully, your local authorities are too.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I can see someone else might be typing another question. I had a question for you as well. I'm not sure if you've come across this, or maybe even in the data collection that you've got from the frog census, but I was listening to a podcast that was talking about frogs having accents. So frog acoustic recordings from different places around. I think they were talking about Australia, but have you noticed, or has Melbourne Water's data collection kind of revealing a little bit of an accent around Melbourne or around Victoria?
Well, we haven't investigated it on the Melbourne level, so I better add that one to the list, I think. But yeah, I mean, certainly, yeah, it's absolutely true. Like, I mean, there's great foundational work on acoustics done by frog legendary gurus like Murray Littlejohn and Jodie Rowley, like currently on this. Yeah, look, I guess probably the broad point is, say, between the Melbourne region, the southern area, and the north of the state, the spotted marsh frog has a different accent, so to say. Here our local one tends to call with more of a like kind of click, 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 whereas up north it has a bit more of a machine gun rattle, particularly when they're calling in chorus, so more of a drrrr call. So that's probably the most noticeable difference. And when we get reports from out of the Melbourne region, we often get those two different accents.
Yeah, right. That's great. Yes, there is a lot of love about all of your facts, your froggy facts. There's lots of suggestions that we should have had the video on for you to be able to see everyone's face while you were telling them those interesting facts.
Oh.
Good job, James.
My bandwidth would survive.
Yeah. I think we might have finished up with most of the questions that are coming through, but yes, definitely lots of love, James, for your the creatures that you love as well. So we might finish up there. I just want to say a very big thank you for your time today, James, and thank you everyone who's online for giving your time to be here, and the great questions and comments that you shared as well. Just a reminder, this presentation will be uploaded to the Volunteering in Nature website. But there's also another opportunity this afternoon to join a webinar at 2 p.m. This webinar will be hosted, the presenter will be Bruce Quinn, whose nickname is Mr. Helmeted Honeyeater. So he's the authority on helmeted honeyeaters. So that webinar, you can find out about how volunteers can help save our state emblem, the helmeted honeyeater. If you want to join, you can register for that one on Park Connect. And as always, please stay tuned for volunteer opportunities on Park Connect and our website. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in contact and email us at volunteer@parks.vic.gov.au. We trust that you'll continue to enjoy the range of activities offered this week, and a big thanks to all of our volunteers who provide your time, your skills, your expertise to help protect and conserve our precious places. So happy International Volunteer Day tomorrow. Please take care, everyone. And once again, James, a big thank you to you for sharing the world of frogs with us.
Oh, thanks so much, Mel. And yeah, thanks to everyone who attended. And yeah, helmeted honeyeaters, my favourite bird. Highly recommend hearing Bruce. He's the guru of helmeted honeyeaters. Yeah.
Agree. Oh, we might see you in the next one then, James.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.